The public imagination is fixated on the wrong vector. Media cycles display hypersonic missiles as the apex threat, a kinetic, telegenic spectacle. This is a deliberate misdirection. The mathematics of modern warfare are no longer calculated in kilotons, but in terabytes. The decisive battleground is not a city, it is silence. According to CSIS analysis, over 95% of global data, including trillions in financial transactions, travels through a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. This is the central nervous system of the world. It is fragile, it is accessible, and its disruption is the primary objective. Simultaneously, RUSI reports highlight the emergent threat of satellite blinding, not destruction, but temporary, non-attributable signal denial. An AI-enabled adversary, as outlined in recent Pentagon threat assessments, does not need to launch a missile. It needs only to sever these two vectors, undersea and orbital, to achieve a systemic shock. This creates the blind Leviathan, a hegemon already facing a systemic solvency crisis predicted for 2026 and navigating the liability of fractured alliances, is suddenly deaf and dumb. Its financial markets are frozen, its command and control is gone. With its primary leverage, economic and digital dominance, neutralized, its only remaining protocol is a disproportionate kinetic response. The solvency crisis becomes the mathematical trigger for a launch on warning posture. This is asymmetric escalation. States do not go to war for ideology. They go to war to manage their balance sheets. A conventional military is the ultimate domestic liability, an asset that only generates returns under specific kinetic conditions. When a state can no longer afford the carrying cost of this asset, it faces a solvency crisis. This is not a political failure, it is a mathematical one. Observe the motive for the current European conflict. CSIS analysis frames the prolonged kinetic engagement not as a quest for territory, but as a systemic solvency crisis. The prohibitive cost of conventional operations created a domestic liability that the state's fragile economy could not support. The war became unpopular because it was, fundamentally, unaffordable. When a state is cornered by insolvency, its strategic calculus pivots. It is forced to abandon the expensive, attritional model of conventional war. The objective is no longer to win on the battlefield, but to create a disproportionate cost for the adversary. This is the pivot to asymmetry. It is a strategy born from economic weakness, not military ambition. This pivot is now an accelerant. As documented by The Hill, artificial intelligence is reshaping the future of war. AI drastically lowers the entry cost for executing high-impact, asymmetric shocks against critical infrastructure. It automates the discovery of systemic vulnerabilities, transforming economic weakness into a potent offensive weapon. Therefore, a state facing a solvency crisis is not defeated. It is incentivized. Unable to compete symmetrically, its only remaining leverage is an AI-enabled asymmetric shock. Weakness forces the hand, transforming an internal economic problem into an external vector for escalation. This is the launch on warning protocol for the 21st century solvency crisis. The math of modern warfare is no longer solvent. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, puts the kinetic cost into perspective. A $5 million main battle tank can be neutralized by a $500 drone. This is not an error in accounting. This is an extinction-level event for legacy military doctrine. This 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry is the engine for what military strategists call the democratization of violence. The monopoly on projecting lethal, strategic force, once held exclusively by superpowers with trillion-dollar budgets, has been irrevocably broken. It is now a distributed capability. Artificial intelligence acts as a systemic accelerant. As The Hill reports, AI is reshaping war by transforming cheap hardware into autonomous hunter-killer swarms. A single operator can now command a saturation attack that would have previously required an entire air wing, turning a tactical liability into an existential economic threat. For a hegemon facing a solvency crisis, this new battlefield is a mathematical trap. You cannot win a war of attrition when your opponent's primary weapon costs less than a single artillery shell. Every destroyed asset is a vector pushing the national balance sheet towards insolvency, forcing a launch-on-warning posture to avoid being bled dry. The kinetic cost of direct peer-to-peer conflict is now a mathematical impossibility. It is a zero-sum game. Therefore, adversaries require a gray zone, a proxy laboratory to test, refine, and stage new vectors of asymmetric attack. These regional instabilities are not random acts of chaos. They are controlled experiments in a petri dish. The first vector tested is economic solvency. The Argentina currency swap crisis was not a bailout. It was a field test. It provided a blueprint for weaponizing liquidity, forcing a target nation to liquidate dollar-denominated assets under extreme duress. This is how you stress test the hegemon's financial architecture without firing a shot. The second vector targets alliance cohesion. As documented by The Guardian, diplomatic friction over strategic assets like Greenland is a diagnostic tool. Adversaries use these events to probe the structural integrity of legacy alliances. It measures the delta between a stated security guarantee and the actual political will to enforce it. The goal is to turn an ally into a liability. The accelerant for these experiments is artificial intelligence. USI and CSIS analysts confirm that AI is no longer theoretical. It is actively deployed in these gray zones. It models economic shocks and optimizes disinformation campaigns to fracture social cohesion. AI allows an adversary to simulate an attack on the core system 1,000 times in a proxy state before launching the perfected protocol once. These proxy laboratories are staging grounds. Once the protocols for economic collapse and alliance failure are perfected, the vector is re-aimed. The systemic solvency crisis, which established indicators now forecast for 2026, is the designated window. The gray zone operations are not the war, they are the pre-launch sequence for it. The launch-on-warning doctrine is a systemic protocol from the Cold War, a period marked by fragile alliances. The logic is simple. If early warning radar detects an incoming strike, you launch a counterstrike before the first impact. The system's only liability is its absolute trust in the data feed. Now, introduce the accelerant. According to reports from The Hill, artificial intelligence is reshaping the future of war, creating vectors previously unimaginable. An AI-driven cyber attack does not need to physically destroy a satellite. It only needs to corrupt or sever its data stream. This creates what analysts at CSIS refer to as the fog of digital war. The screens in the command bunker go black. The commander is now blind. Is this a system malfunction, or are nuclear assets inbound? The protocol demands a binary decision based on incomplete, potentially manipulated data. Here, the solvency crisis becomes the trigger. With recession indicators flashing a warning for 2026, a hegemon cannot absorb the kinetic cost of a first strike. Fear becomes the final variable. The commander, forced to choose between the risk of launching on a ghost and the mathematical certainty of annihilation if they hesitate, has no choice. The system is designed to force the launch. This is how a cyber attack becomes a vector for asymmetric escalation. Before the systemic shock, a calibration is required. An adversary must test the response protocol of a declining system. Reports from RUSI and The Hill confirm that artificial intelligence is reshaping warfare, not through brute force, but through precision probes. The objective is not destruction, it is data acquisition, to map the lag time between an asymmetric event and a kinetic response. The timeline is no longer theoretical. The Warren Buffett indicator, a historically accurate measure of market solvency, now explicitly flashes a warning for 2026. This financial fragility is compounded by geopolitical isolation. The Guardian's analysis of Cold War-era alliance fractures shows a declining capacity to distribute risk. The system is brittle, and it is alone. The calibration shot must, therefore, be economic, not military. An AI-enabled, attribution-impossible event designed to measure the fragility of the physical supply chain. The vector is a simultaneous cyber-physical attack that produces a logistical blackout. It is a low-cost method to calculate the exact kinetic threshold required to trigger a solvency crisis. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a multi-hour, unexplained shutdown of the data and power infrastructure for a primary U.S. West Coast container port. The official report will cite cascading grid failure. This is incorrect. It will be the final data collection phase before the main economic event of 2026.